Once again, the Gilded Age. This time we're talking about urbanization. It's a word maybe you haven't heard of before. It means the growth of cities. So we'll talk about how the cities grew during the Gilded Age, and again, see some of the connections between some of the other videos we've already watched. Okay, so we're talking about the growth of cities. So the first thing we have to deal with is what caused the cities to grow. We're talking about in terms of population. Well, obviously it's going to be migration to the cities. Who's migrating? We have foreign immigrants, the new immigrants that we've talked about in another video, and then also native-born migration. That means people that are coming off the countryside, moving to the cities. Why are they coming to the cities? Well, everybody's looking for a better job. Doesn't matter if you're coming off the farm or if you're coming from Europe, you're looking for a better job. And as we're in this period where business is growing and they're putting in more factories, as factories grew, so do cities. Here as an example, I'm going to put these numbers on here. I will not give you the numbers on a test. That's mean. This is just here as an example, but as an example, pick on Chicago. In 1860, Chicago had approximately 100,000 residents. By 1900, they have over 1 million. I did the math on this. The population of Chicago is doubling. That means they're doubling roughly every about 7.5 years. This is a tenfold increase in population in just 40 years. This is explosive growth. It's ridiculous growth. Where are all those people going to go? Where do they live? The answer is nowhere. Because the growth happens so rapidly in so many of these cities, they could not build housing fast enough to accommodate all these people. And so what ends up happening is somebody with some money is going to throw up some kind of building. It's not going to be very well constructed. The neighborhood isn't going to be very, very well maintained. We're just putting a building wherever we can. And what ends up happening is a lot of the people, especially the poor people, end up moving into what we're going to characterize as slums, impoverished areas. In the Gilded Age in New York, they have a contest. Oddly enough, this is not the last time New York did that. They did this a couple of years ago. They had a contest for architects who can design a cheap building that we can put up quickly and house all the people that are trying to move here. In the Gilded Age, they came up with something called the tenement, or sometimes it's referred to as the Dumbbell tenement. This is a diagram of a typical dumbbell tenement. You see these are different sections. We're going to look at the middle one where it's all labeled, but these are just going to be reflections. They're going to be the same thing. This one here, this one up here, these are going to be the same as this one we're looking at here in the middle. In between the different sections of the building, you had an air shaft, and what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to open up these windows, and it will, as you open up, say, a window here, and then a window here, and then it allows air to circulate through. This is in the days before air conditioning, so this is kind of your air conditioning by physics, basically. But these are going to be multiple stories tall. Why are they able to build these big, huge skyscrapers? Well, because of the improvements that are continuing to be made in the steel industry. So there's one connection. And so, you kind of look at the diagram of this thing. Let's look real quick at it. This right here is going to be one apartment. You might see a door here going into the bedroom. If we look over here, here's a 2-bedroom apartment. You might see 3 doors here. All right, so you had an extra door out in the hallway. You could always lock that, whatever. This is going to be your main door. So we have our living room where we're going to hang out. There'll be a kitchen somewhere in this area. This is the parlor. This is where we're going to actually sit and discuss. You'll have your kitchen somewhere in here. Your bedroom, in this case over here, the 2-bedroom apartment. You had to walk through bedroom number 1 to get to bedroom number 2. That's nice. This is your apartment right here. Okay. In this case over here, 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a parlor. There is one really important part of your dwelling that I have not mentioned. I said your kitchen's going to be somewhere in this area. Your parlor, your living room, and your bedroom. What room is missing? Can you guess? Have you figured it out yet? Did you say the bathroom? That's going to be out here. WC. It stands for water closet. Another way of saying bathroom. Notice that's not connected to your apartment. That's public. Hey, everybody lives here. Everybody lives there. And then these guys over here, because it might be one might be occupied at some point. This is public bathroom. Yay, fun times. And what makes it a little bit more interesting, maybe, you might get a 2-bedroom apartment for you and your family. Your family may just live in 1 bedroom because you could rent the other bedroom out. Okay? You might not have enough money to afford rent on one of these apartments by yourself, so you could rent a bedroom out. You might rent 2 bedrooms out. Maybe to another family, maybe to another individual. So you talking maybe 4 families, minimum of 4 families, 4 family units, maximum of 12 family units, all sharing the same bathroom. Good times. Now, why did they put up these tenement buildings? Well, because they were cheap. They were cheap to build. The rents were fairly cheap. Like I said, they're fairly cheap, but for some of these people, the rent was still too expensive. Remember, in economic downturns, what do businesses do to cut costs? They lower workers' wages. Well, if your wages have been lowered and now you can't afford the rent, what do? You find somebody to help move in and help pay the rent. Okay? These tenements were usually built in what I've called here undesirable neighborhoods. And I put that in quotation marks. I didn't want you to get the idea that, they're finding a place nobody wants to live and putting it there. What I mean by this is they're located in areas that just aren't pleasant to live in. I'm talking about places near factories or other sources of pollution. Okay? The poor neighborhoods were built near the factories for 2 reasons. Number one, if you're wealthier, you don't want to live there, so okay, who's going to live here? Number two, if you're poor, you couldn't afford to live too far away from work. You had to be kind of within walking distance. There's demand for housing near the factories. The problem with that is because the factories are producing pollution of different sorts, that's then blowing through the neighborhood. Most cities had an area near the factories that they called the lung block because of all the soot and ash that was being pumped out of those smokestacks in the factories. They drift through the neighborhood and had higher incidence of respiratory disease and asthma and all sorts of things related to the stuff they're breathing in because they have to live next to the factory. And that's not counting other sources of pollution that the businesses may be putting out there into the environment. Now, middle and upper class people, as we're growing a middle class in the Gilded Age, they lived further out from the factories. If you think of a target, if you think of a bullseye, right in the middle, the bullseye are going to be the factories. That first layer outside the factories, that's where most of your poor individuals are going to live because they can't afford to live anywhere else. Then you have these rings kind of around the factories. The further away from the factory are, the higher source of income, the higher income you had. Because you wanted to get away from that pollution. You wanted to get away from that kind of things. But it did not mean that you were immune from the problems of cities. It does not mean that at all. So what are some of those problems? There's a variety of them. They appear in no particular order. If you can see the background, you might notice that one of the first problems is a lack of proper sanitation. Sewers were not connected. We would start building a sewer. We would know that, hey, in a month or two, somebody's going to build a tenement right here, so we're not really going to cap off the sewer here. We're just going to leave it open because we're just going to have to dig everything up and connect it when they finish that tenement. So we'll just leave it open for right now. Well, sanitation was a problem. Trash. Think of the garbage collectors. Population doubles. They're not able to add garbage collection as quickly as they need to. This is just a fun sight to behold. We are still in an era where the horse is the main source of transportation. Well, just like your car, your horse could be out in the middle of the street one day and it could just die on you. Problem is you're not going to crank it back to life. Well, what did you do? You left it there. And so that's just flat out disgusting. Horses also produce their own pollution. There were people, they were employed. There was a service that they came through and they swept the streets to clean up all of the horse pollution. But then you have to find a place to put that. So we have increased pollution, not only from the horses, but also from the factories that were there. We've talked about the smoke. Rockefeller, in his refining process, they started out they were refining kerosene. Well, in the process of refining kerosene, they found out that there was this byproduct. They couldn't really figure out what to do with it. It was highly volatile. It was kind of unpredictable. They didn't know what to do with it. So at first, what they were doing is they were taking this byproduct and pouring it into the local rivers, which then, is going to the water table and doing who knows what. They didn't know what it was. It didn't have a chemical compound chemical structure they were familiar with, so they just referred to it as gasoline. So yeah, that's where that came from, and that's where they were putting it before they figured out you could put it into your car. So they've got that increased pollution from factories, but also from the sanitation issues. There's increased crime in the cities. You put all those people together, you're going to have some unsavory elements if it's 1/2 of 1%. 1/2 of 1% of 100,000 is a much smaller number than 1/2 of 1% of 1,000,000. And so there was increased crime. There were occasional disease outbreaks, and these are not necessarily related to the pollution and sanitation issues. That's why I kind of broke it up with the crime issues. You're in an era where they didn't have the same kind of vaccines. They didn't have the same kind of medical care as we did. So you'd have a disease outbreak. Imagine living in one of those tenements and somebody in there gets typhoid or malaria. That is going to sweep through the tenement. And so what the public health officials would do is, if somebody in the tenement got diagnosed with one of these diseases, if they noticed a kind of a sudden upsurge in this one building, they would quarantine the whole building. This whole building is now locked down. What if you were in there and you weren't sick? You're in there. There's also going to be increase in poverty and homelessness, especially in the economic downturns when people can't afford their rents anymore. And there are significant needs in the cities for mass transit, being able to move people from place to place, but also public buildings, not only the tenements and places to live, but also government offices, hospitals. You think about the fine arts things, libraries, those sorts of things. There's a need for that. And so as the cities grow, we see the growth of these other things that are called political machines. So here we get into a little bit of politics. And a political machine is a group of politicians, organizers, political organizers, and business interests. These are going to be your smaller businesses. This is not going to be Rockefeller. These are going to be local businesses. But what they do is they work together, and their goal is to take political control of a city. And why would they want to do that? So that they can turn around and steal money from the government. And that's the goal of the political machine ultimately. Political machines are ultimately corrupt. Okay? but they're very organized. They're very well organized and very well managed because they're going out there to win elections. Because if they can win elections, they can control the government and they can control who it buys stuff from. Now, political machines do provide services. They do provide help. There are all kinds of cases where political machines are doing good things for people. They helped out immigrants that were coming to the big cities. They help out the people that are coming, from the rural areas to the cities. I saw one case where this guy, he ran a political machine, and on his mother's birthday, he went into the tenement neighborhoods and he distributed shoes to anybody who needed shoes. He had the money that he was able to do that. Why are they doing these things? Because these people are voters. And if I can keep you happy and get you on my side, then when I have done something good for you, I come back to you when it's time for the next election and I say, look, I've done all these wonderful things for you. I need you to do me a favor now. I need you to vote for my friend over here. That was how they won elections. They got the public on their side. Okay? The political machines built buildings. They provided infrastructure. Okay? The roads, the government buildings, the sewers, everything is going to be provided for by the political machines, but it was done at inflated cost. Okay, the fact that they're leaving a sewer open isn't because they're corrupt. The fact that they're leaving the sewer open is because they're going to connect it to a new one they're going to build, 2 months from now. But the sewer that might have taken, it might have cost the city, $10,000 to build. The political machine is going to upcharge it, and the city's going to say, oh yes, we will pay the $30,000 it costs to build this segment. The way machine politics was organized is reflected best by this, probably the most infamous political machine, Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall was the New York City Democratic political machine. It was run by a guy named Boss Tweed. Hey, William Boss Tweed, that's what they call him. Later on, it'd be taken over by a guy named Big Tim Sullivan. I say it's the Democratic political machine. Don't misunderstand me. There were Republican political machines too. This is just the best known of the political machines. And what they would do, they would go out and win an election, and then the politicians that have won the election, let us pretend the mayor does everything. The mayor is part of our political machine. He would then award government contracts to the businesses that were part of his political machine. Those political machines would then turn around and overcharge the city. The mayor would, of course, sign off on it. The business would take this extra cash that they've now stolen from the government, and they would spread it around the political machine. How do we have enough money to buy shoes for the poor people in the tenements? Well, it's from some of the money we've stolen. Not all of it. We're lining our pockets with a lot of it. Okay? And so some of the contracts they would give up, construction, building, sanitation, vote counting. Private companies used to count the votes in elections. So it's real important your political machine win. That way you can give away the contract to count the votes so you can keep winning. This is another political cartoon, okay? Notice the ballot box up here. In counting, there is strength. This is going to be Boss Tweed. He had that nice little pear shape to him. Politicians would also give jobs to their political supporters. We've talked about this before with Andrew Jackson. With Andrew Jackson, we called it the spoils system. By the time we get to the Gilded Age, the term is patronage, giving jobs to your political supporters. Now, not everybody likes this. Even in the Gilded Age, people say this is corrupt and this has to stop. And so a lot of people see the corruption and they want it to stop. Some of them are politicians. Some politicians look and say, this is not why we are here. This is not why we run for office. Okay? Some of them were in political machines. How do you get elected in an environment where it's dominated by political machines? You join one. You hold your nose and you join one. Republicans, looking specifically at Republicans who wanted to stop the idea of patronage, they at least thought, giving jobs to our political supporters isn't really a good idea. They were called mugwumps. Other Republicans who liked the idea of patronage, they called them mugwumps. You're just a bunch of mugwumps. What a stupid term. Journalists also are out there trying to expose the corruption, and the journalists are probably going to make the biggest difference because they're able to reach the public in a different way. If the public thinks that the politicians are all corrupt, the public becomes jaded. But if journalists come out and say, look, here are the corrupt ones. I'm talking about this one over here. He's corrupt. I'm not talking about the other guy. Oh, I need to get out there and vote for the other guy. One of the journalists who works at exposing these political machines is a guy named Thomas Nast. This is a kind of a self-portrait of Thomas Nast. He was a political cartoonist. He's not a journalist in the way we think of a journalist. He's not writing articles. He's drawing political cartoons. Boss Tweed, when asked about the journalists that were coming after him, they said, what about these articles that are being written about you? And Boss Tweed said, I don't care about the articles that are being written. My voters can't read. But they can understand those damn pictures that were being drawn by Thomas Nast. Thomas Nast specifically goes after Tammany Hall. He viewed them as insanely corrupt. And so, he draws all kinds of things. This is another one that he drew of Boss Tweed. The one we saw earlier was of Boss Tweed. Ultimately, Thomas Nast is responsible for Tammany Hall's defeat in the 1871 elections in New York. Now, they don't go away. They come back, but in 1871, the voters are at least outraged enough that they vote in another group. This cartoon over here, one of my personal favorites, this is the one that finally got Boss Tweed sent to prison. He had been arrested, he'd been put on trial for corruption and whatever, and found guilty, and while he was out awaiting sentencing, he fled the country, and he fled to Spain. In Spain, some local Spanish cops get a hold of a American newspaper, Harper's Weekly, and they saw this cartoon of Boss Tweed basically thumbing his nose at the law. Haha, you can't get me. And they put the paper down and happened to look across the street and saw him sitting in a cafe. And from the cartoon, recognized him as this guy that needed to be sent back to New York to prison. But anyway, as the Gilded Age ends, and this political corruption becomes more and more known and and well known, more and more people are going to start calling for a change, and we are eventually going to see some change. Does machine politics still exist? I'll let you do your own research and decide. Have a good evening, a good morning, a good day at school, wherever you are in life. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope it helps you out.